If you grew up in the 80s, this sound changed your whole childhood. I am And it doesn't matter how old you are now. When you heard it, tell me if something in your brain didn't just activate. And it wasn't just any sound. It wasn't just any shout. It was the exact moment when the best part of your day was about to begin. The part you liked the most and enjoyed the most. But do you know how many kids in the world heard that shout for the first time in 1983? More than those who watched Star Wars that year. Because yes, gentlemen, He-Man was the best-selling toy in all of the United States. More than Luke Skywalker. A blonde warrior with a magic sword beat an entire galaxy. And today in this video, I'm going to tell you why. Close your eyes for a moment. It's December, it smells like pine, it smells like pozole, it smells like turkey, it smells like leftovers at your grandma's house. And there's a box under that Christmas tree with your name on it. You open it, and there he is, He-Man, with a silver sword, his shield, his impossible muscles. You had in your hands the best-selling action figure on the planet at that moment, and you didn't even know it. But it wasn't just He-Man, it was an entire universe. There was Skeletor. With that blue skull, he frightened you a bit, but you still wanted him in your collection. There was Battle Cat, which interestingly was designed in less than 10 minutes as a filler, and he ended up being the most popular in the whole series, even more than He-Man. There was Castle Grayskull, that huge castle with the skull on the door that very few parents could afford to buy. It cost a fortune at the time. How many of you actually had that castle when you were kids? Let me know down below in the comments. And then there was a figure that almost didn't exist. Most people never had one of those. I'll explain more later. But before we talk about toys, we have to talk about something that very few people know. He-Man almost didn't exist. In 1977, Mattel had the chance to buy the rights to Star Wars. They looked at them, evaluated them, and said no. That laser swords and robot stuff wasn't gonna sell. If they had said yes, He-Man would never have existed. When they realized how successful Star Wars was, they regretted it for a long time. But they didn't dwell on that failure. They decided to create their own universe from scratch. And that's how a designer named Mark Taylor started making sketches on napkins, on scraps of paper, on whatever he could find. A giant primitive warrior with a huge sword. He didn't have a name yet, no story, but the character was already there. And here's something that's gonna blow your mind. Mattel released the toys before they had the story. There was no cartoon, no comics. They only had the figure. The universe was invented later to justify what they were already selling. That's why He-Man doesn't have a single origin. That's why there's a figure called Soda that almost nobody remembers. It was created solely to fulfill a production contract, not because anyone wanted it in the line. And when Filmation came to make the cartoon, they were given 56 character cards, and they were told, make up the rest. Everything you remember from the series, and by the way, they did it with very little money. Mattel didn't want to pay for the series. They offered them a percentage of the profits from the series to Filmation so they could make it. And Filmation made it on a shoestring. Everything you remember from the series, Castle Grayskull, the Sorceress, Adam's Secret, it was invented by animators working under pressure against the clock, working long hours to create the cartoon you saw. First they sold the toy, and then they invented the hero. And this is where things get interesting. If you grew up with He-Man, you likely have your own version of the story in mind. But this version isn't the same as your cousins, or your classmates, or your older brothers. That's why nowadays there are so many debates on social media about He-Man. Because He-Man has more than 4 different origins. Yes, you heard that, right? 4 different origins. And none of them are official. Because Mattel never bothered to tell us. This is the origin of He-Man. This is the real universe. If we go back to the beginning, in the mini comics that were sold and came with a toy, He-Man was not Prince Adam. He was a warrior from Eternia. Period. That's it. There's no secret. There's no double identity. There's no man-at-arms. Just a man with a sword who fought against Skeletor. In the Filmation cartoon that we all know, he's Prince Adam, son of King Randor, who transforms into He-Man by raising the sword. That's the version that's stuck in our memory. Or at least that's how I remember it. In the DC comics, the story is completely different. 3 versions, 3 different origins, and none of them are official. But out of all this chaos, one thing is clear. This blue man stole the show. And since we're talking about Skeletor, why is Skeletor so obsessed with the power kept in Castle Grayskull? Why does he want that castle at any cost? The answer also changes depending on the version, but there's one explanation that makes much more sense than the others. And it turns Skeletor into something more than just a cartoon villain. According to the original mini-comics, Castle Grayskull holds the universe's secret, literally, the knowledge of all creation, of life. Whoever possesses it becomes omnipotent. It's not a castle, it's a key. And Skeletor has been chasing that key for decades without being able to obtain it. And this is what makes Skeletor the most brilliant villain of all, more than any Marvel or DC villain. He's not a foolish, obsessed villain. He doesn't want to destroy the world. He wants to have it all. He wants to obtain absolute knowledge of the universe. And Mattel had him right there, in a toy line for 6-year-old kids, without anyone paying attention to all the backstory this character had. But yes, without a doubt, he was the character we liked the most. And the funny thing is, it wasn't planned that way. Originally, he was a secondary character. The main villain was someone else. Skeletor became the focus because kids loved him. Kids adored Skeletor. Mattel saw it in sales, and the rest is history. They sold more Skeletor figures than He-Man himself. And look at this, I don't have a He-Man figure, but I do have a Skeletor figure. And then there's the Sorceress, the soul of Castle Grayskull. The character with the most importance in the whole mythology of, let's see, the universe. They made very few figures. It seems like Mattel didn't understand the character they had in their hands, or maybe she was too expensive to make. I don't know. Only they know. Something that's really important to mention, and I don't want it to be overlooked. One thing that made He-Man a success in Mexico was the dubbing. Without a doubt, Mexican dubbing is among the best in the world.
Now phase 2 will begin. I'm going to make another He-Man. And he will be as evil as I am. We'll be in the jungle, Punchy.
Take that thing already. See you, hairy beast, or I'll turn you into stone, and at danger too.
Tell me if you've seen the English versions. Which do you prefer, the English version or the Spanish version? The one that came out back then in Mexico. When the voice actors had real freedom to interpret a character. But do you know what's the best thing about Masters of the Universe? As you know, I wasn't a fan of these figures. I've always said it in the video. But I've seen it hundreds of times. How adults, how older people who grew up with Masters of the Universe find a figure and make a gesture of love. A gesture that brought back childhood memories and sparked dreams. I've seen it countless times. When they find 80s figures from Masters of the Universe, their first reaction is a smile. And yes, sometimes it's good to romanticize this, and yes, it's part of our childhood, and it's something that new generations won't understand. I connect with Mazinger Z. I love it. A Mazinger Z figure would really lift my mood. I went to the flea market over the weekend. I went to sell, and a person showed up with a little dog figure he had as a child. A little dog. We're not talking about universes. When I arrived, when he saw it, he smiled and he hugged it. He didn't let go of it anymore. He didn't put it back on the table because he had that little dog as a child. My son stared at him. And at that moment, he said to me, "Dad, now I can understand how you feel when you see that figure. It's not a Skeletor figure. Here is your childhood. Here are your memories. Here are the experiences you had with your family. And it can remind you of your mom, your grandmother, I don't know, your brother. And surely this Skeletor figure will bring back a memory for you right now. Something I always tell you. To always remember that the real value of a figure is not its monetary value. It's what it makes you feel." But if we're going to talk about monetary value, let's talk about He-Man, a complete He-Man with sword and shield in good condition. That came out many years ago. In the 80s today, it can go for between 300 and 600 pesos at the flea market, depending on the seller and depending on the condition. A complete Castle Grayskull with its accessories, it can easily cost between 2,000 and 3,000 pesos. There's a variant that came out in Mexico, which is a little more expensive. Fortunately, prices have already gone down. They've stabilized. Because a few years ago, it was very hard to get a He-Man figure from the 80s in good condition at an affordable price. One of the most expensive and most sought after figures in the whole universe is the Laser Power He-Man, one of the last figures released before the line ended. Few bought it then, since the line was ending. Now, in good condition, it's worth more than your whole Masters of the Universe collection. If you spot one at a flea market, don't miss it. Also, be sure you can identify the figures, especially if you like original vintage ones. Modern reproductions look perfect, too perfect. The original plastic from the 80s has a slightly different color. a different weight, and the mold seams feel different. The most important thing to remember here is that at the flea market, you're not looking for toys. You're not seeking value or profit. You're searching for pieces of your childhood, for memories and feelings. And trust me, that can't be bought. It's priceless. In 1987, the Doug Lundgren movie was released, featuring He-Man. Frank Langella played Skeletor. It was produced by Cannon Films, the studio that made action movies like crazy in the 80s, and man, that was disastrous. For many, that movie should never have existed. It was such a huge box office disaster that it contributed to the partial bankruptcy of Cannon. The toy line collapsed, the cartoon ended, and He-Man disappeared for many years. Things were quiet. An entire generation grew up without knowing who He-Man was. And those who knew him kept him in their memories as something that belonged to us and no one else. In fact, there were many people who started to debate whether He-Man should exist in the 90s. Then, in 2002, they tried to revive him with the 2000 X-Line figures with better detail, an updated cartoon with better animation. It was objectively better than the original in many technical aspects. And guess what? It also failed. It didn't have that magic. It didn't have that love. It didn't have what the first Masters of the Universe cartoon had. In 2008, Masters of the Universe Classic arrived. Collectible figures for adults, expensive, detailed, sold online. That one did work. They were selling nostalgia to adults who had credit cards. They wanted to reclaim something from childhood. And then Revelation came out on Netflix, which completely divided the fans. Personally, I didn't like it. I think I regretted watching it. I stopped halfway through. And now in June 2026, the new movie is coming. We're just 2 or 3 days away from the premiere of the new He-Man movie. Can a 2026 movie give these characters what they deserve after 40 years? I don't know how you guys feel about it. But I think it's the perfect time for us to bring back that magic of Masters of the Universe. For them to finally get a movie that does them justice, that represents everything our childhood was, and what it made us feel. I think the question nowadays isn't whether the movie will be good or bad. The question is, why are we still here talking about a plastic warrior from the 80s today? It's very viral on social media. And the answer is simple. He-Man wasn't a superhero. He didn't come from another planet. He wasn't bitten by a spider. He didn't have a childhood trauma that turned him into a hero. He was a man who raised the sword and decided to be the best version of himself. The best version of himself. A 6-year-old child could understand that without anyone having to explain it. That's why it's unforgettable. So this July 5th, you can go in with very high expectations or with very low expectations. And you can say that maybe you don't like the movie, or maybe you do. But there's one thing I can assure you. When you hear By the Power of Grayskull again, you're going to get goosebumps. And you'll remember when you were 6, 7, or 10 years old. Tell me what you expect from He-Man. I'll read your comments down below. If you've seen the movie, share your thoughts. Did you like it? What stood out most? Also, what do you recall about Masters of the Universe? This is Teodoro Vasquez from Mexico. See you next time. Enjoy and be happy. Live your memories. And don't let anyone tell you what to collect or what to do. You have that choice. I am He-Man.